when news broke in July 1969 that American astronauts had landed on the moon. The Soviet Union was unprepared for the psychological earthquake it unleashed among its citizens, for the event struck at the very heart of a narrative that had been cultivated for more than a decade. Propaganda had assured people that it was the USSR that led humanity into the cosmos, that Soviet rockets and cosmonauts were unmatched, and that the red flag would surely be the first to mark the lunar surface. So when millions of ordinary men and women across the Soviet Union saw images of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walking on the moon, they were left in stunned silence, caught between pride in human achievement and confusion at why their own nation had not arrived first. For some, the shock was immediate and deeply personal. Workers who had contributed to the Soviet space industry, students who had recited poems praising Gagarin, and families who had proudly hung Soviet space propaganda posters on their walls suddenly realized that the future they had been promised was not unfolding as expected. In cities like Moscow and Leningrad, whispers spread quickly, fueled by rumors and questions that official media could not answer. While in rural villages, the event was often discussed in hushed tones, sometimes dismissed as Western trickery, other times reluctantly accepted as a painful truth. The controlled Soviet press covered the moon landing with only brief and muted reports, framing it as a scientific milestone rather than a political victory. But this very restraint revealed the vulnerability of the Kremlin's position, for ordinary citizens could sense the unease between the lines, and those who managed to hear Western broadcasts or see smuggled newspapers knew that this was not just another space mission, but a defining moment of the century. Many older citizens, shaped by decades of propaganda, clung to the belief that America must have faked the achievement, that the images were staged in a studio, a suspicion quietly encouraged by the state to soften the blow. Yet younger generations, university students, scientists, and those with access to shortwave radios, understood the scale of the accomplishment and began to question the long-assumed inevitability of Soviet supremacy. In factories, workers debated whether the Americans had truly pulled ahead. In schools, teachers avoided direct comparisons, but could not stop curious students from asking why no Soviet had taken that historic step. And even in the armed forces, soldiers whispered about how the West had beaten them in what was supposed to be the ultimate demonstration of technological and ideological superiority. The emotional reactions varied: pride that humanity had finally reached the moon, admiration for the astronauts' courage, disbelief that it had not been a Soviet cosmonaut, and in some cases, quiet anger at leaders who had promised victory but delivered disappointment. It was not rebellion, but it was a crack in the carefully polished surface of certainty that had defined Soviet life. Official ceremonies downplayed the event, with state media emphasizing upcoming Soviet missions and the importance of unmanned exploration. Yet the very act of minimization revealed weakness, for citizens could not ignore what they had seen with their own eyes or heard through foreign broadcasts, and the contrast between expectation and reality lingered long after the lunar dust had settled. The shock of the moon landing thus became more than a single historical moment. It was a cultural and psychological turning point, one that forced Soviet citizens to reconcile years of promises and propaganda with the undeniable fact that the Americans had achieved what their own nation had not, a revelation that would echo quietly through the Soviet Union in the years to come, reshaping how people viewed not only the space race, but also the credibility of the system that had told them victory was inevitable.